Have you ever wondered whether or not the ordinary work you do each day actually matters to God? I think we have a tendency, and the tendency is as follows, that we separate our lives into what is spiritual, what is practical, but what's interesting is that all of our actions, whatever they may be, is something that God can delight in if we're attaching it to that spiritual aspect. In 1 Kings chapter 7, for example, we're going to see Solomon completing, we're going to see the completion of Solomon's palace. We're going to see the master craftsmanship of Hiram and the furnishings of the temple and how every single detail points back to God's glory. But what's interesting is he turns his everyday work into an act of worship, right? And that's what we're going to go through in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So, 1 Kings chapter 7 continues the story of Solomon's building projects, because we saw in 1 Kings chapter 6 the completion of the temple. Now Solomon is going to build his royal palace and several other buildings over 13 years. Then the chapter is going to introduce Hiram of Tyre, who is a master craftsman with remarkable skills, who's going to fashion the bronze pillars, the great bronze sea, the lavers, and countless furnishings for the temple. So every single article is going to be made carefully according to God's purposes. And the chapter is going to end by with Solomon placing the sacred treasures dedicated by David into the house of the Lord. Okay, let's read verses 1 to 12. Focus here is going to be Solomon completing his royal buildings, and pay attention to why God records both the temple and Solomon's ordinary buildings. Verse 1. Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. He built the house of the forest of the Lebanon, 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, built on 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams on the pillars. It was roofed with cedar on the 45 rafters, 15 in each row, which were on the pillars. There were window frames in the 3 rows, facing each other in the 3 rows. All the doorways and doorposts had 4-sided frames, opposite, facing each other in the 3 rows. He made the hall of pillars 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. There was a porch in front with pillars and a canopy in front of them. He made the hall of the throne, where he was to pronounce judgment, the hall of justice, covered with cedar from the floor to the rafters. His own house, where he would reside in the other court, back of the hall, was of the same construction. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken in marriage. All these were made of costly stones, cut according to measure, sawed with saws, back and front, from the foundation to the coping, and from outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, huge stones, stones of 8 and 10 cubits. There were costly stones above, cut to measure, and cedar wood. The great court had 3 courses of dressed stone to 1 layer of cedar beams all around. So had the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibule of the house. Alright, biblical unlock number 1. Why do we see scripture describing Solomon's palace after describing the temple? Okay, why do we need to know about this part? I think it's because there's something that we need to know about God. God is Lord over every part of our lives, not just places of worship. So the temple, that is the center of Israel's relationship with God. But Solomon's palace also reminds us that the everyday responsibilities that we engage in are also under God's rule. And this is what I was talking about in the introduction to this episode. We cannot separate the sacred from the ordinary, because every area of life is meant to honor the Lord. And we need to be thinking about how each and every aspect of our lives can honor the Lord as well. So, anything can become an act of love for God when it is ordered towards His glory. And then the second thing is, Solomon actually spends longer building his palace than the temple. Okay, so the temple was recorded first in its chronology because it holds the most theological importance. But then Scripture always keeps God's dwelling at the center of the story, right? So the relationship with God, that is the temple, must come before our personal achievements. Even if our personal achievements may take longer, what comes first is our relationship with God. Very interesting. The order of our loves matters more than the size of our accomplishments. Okay, let's read verses 13 to 47. We're going to see Hiram crafting the temple furnishings, and I want you to notice how much God values skilled craftsmanship in this section. Verse 13. Now King Solomon invited and received Hiram from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, whose father, a man of Tyre, had been an artisan in bronze. He was full of skill, intelligence, and knowledge in working bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all his work. He cast 2 pillars of bronze. 18 cubits was the height of one, and a cord of 12 cubits would encircle it. The second pillar was the same. He also made 2 capitals of molten bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. There were nets of checker work, with wreaths of chain work for the capitals on the tops of the pillars, 7 for the one capital and 7 for the other capital. He made the columns with 2 rows around each latticework to cover the capitals that were above the pomegranates. He did the same with the other capital. Now the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars in the vestibule were of lily work, 4 cubits high. The capitals were on the 2 pillars and also above the rounded projection that was beside the latticework. There were 200 pomegranates in rows all around, and so with the other capital. He set up the pillars at the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the south and called it Jachin, and he set up the pillar on the north and called it Boaz. On the tops of the pillars was lily work. Thus the work of the pillars was finished. Then he made the molten sea. It was round 10 cubits from brim to brim, and 5 cubits high. A line of 30 cubits would encircle it completely. Under its brim were gourds all around it, each of 10 cubits, surrounding the sea. There were 2 rows of gourds, cast when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them. The hindquarters of each were toward the inside. Its thickness was a handbreadth. Its brim was made like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. He also made 10 stands of bronze. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high. This was the construction of the stands. They had borders. The borders were within the frames. On the borders that were set in the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. On the frames both above and below the lions and oxen, there were wreaths of beveled work. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels and axles of bronze. At the 4 corners were supports for a basin. The supports were cast with wreaths at the side of each. Its opening was within the crown, whose height was 1 cubit. Its opening was round as a pedestal is made. It was 1.5 cubits wide. At its opening there were carvings. Its borders were 4-sided, not round. The 4 wheels were underneath the borders. The axles of the wheels were in the stands, and the height of a wheel was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were made like a chariot wheel. The axles, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs were all cast. There were 4 supports at the 4 corners of each stand. The supports were of one piece with the stands. On the top of the stand there was a round band 0.5 cubit high. On the top of the stand its stays and its borders were of one piece with it. On the surfaces of its stays and on its borders he carved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, where each had space with wreaths all around. In this way he made the 10 stands. All of them were cast alike, with the same size and the same form. He made 10 basins of bronze. Each basin held 40 baths. Each basin measured 4 cubits. There was a basin for each of the 10 stands. He set 5 of the stands on the south side of the house, and 5 on the north side of the house. He set the sea on the southeast corner of the house. Hiram also made the pots, the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice work to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the pillars, the 10 stands, the 10 basins on the stands, the 1 sea, and the 12 oxen underneath the sea, the pots, the shovels, and the basins. All these vessels that Hiram made for King Solomon for the house of the Lord were of burnished bronze. In the plain of the Jordan the king cast them, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all the vessels unweighed because there were so many of them. The weight of the bronze was not determined. Okay, so we spend a lot of time describing the bronze pillars, the basins, the furnishings, because every single detail of God's house reflects his beauty and holiness. And these furnishings are not just, they're not just decorative. They serve in the worship of God and remind Israel that approaching him requires cleansing, it requires reverence, it requires sacrifice. So even the craftsmanship itself becomes an offering of praise. Whatever is offered to the Lord our God should reflect our very best because he is worthy of our highest devotion, not just our leftovers. First thing. Second thing, Hiram's skill is specifically highlighted here. We see God delights in gifting people with different abilities for his glory. Hiram's craftsmanship is just as necessary as Solomon's leadership because God's kingdom advances not just through kings and prophets, but through artisans, through builders, through musicians, through teachers, all of these faithful servants whose gifts reflect the Creator himself. The gifts you have, therefore, reflect the Creator himself. The talents you have are opportunities for worship. Okay, let's read verses 48 to 51. Solomon's going to finish and dedicate the work here. Verse 48. So Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord, the golden altar, the golden table for the bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north, in front of the inner sanctuary, the flowers, the lamps, and the tongs of gold, the cups, snuffers, basins, dishes for incense, and fire pans of pure gold, the sockets for the doors of the innermost part of the house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the main hall of the temple of gold. Thus all the work that King Solomon did on the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon brought in the things that his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and stored them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. Okay, so why is it significant that Solomon completes everything that God had commanded? I want you to remember that faithfulness is not measured by starting your thing well, right? Starting your processes, starting your goals. It's by finishing them. The temple is only ready for worship once the entire work has been completed according to God's design. So obedience is going to persevere until God's promises and purposes have been fulfilled. The Christian life is a continual journey of faithful perseverance towards God's calling, and we should not grow weary in doing good because God honors those who endure till the end. First step. The second thing here is Solomon places David's treasures into the temple, right? We saw that in verse 51. The things that his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and he stored them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. David gathered resources he would never personally use, yet Solomon is the one who faithfully dedicates them to the Lord. So, as I said before in last episode, God's work spans generations and reminds us that we are stewards of an inheritance rather than owners of a legacy. So this is important, receiving and passing on God's blessings from one generation to the next. All right, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. The beauty of Solomon's temple and its furnishings ultimately point towards Jesus Christ and beyond themselves, because every single basin, every altar, lampstand, every pillar serve the worship of God, but they anticipate one who would perfectly reveals God's glory. Because Jesus, as we said before, is both the true temple and the perfect high priest. He is the one who accomplishes forever what the temple rituals could only symbolize. The skilled craftsmanship throughout the chapter reminds us of something, that Christ is building something even greater than the physical sanctuary. Through the Holy Spirit, he is shaping his church into a living temple. Every single one of us has a unique place and purpose, and the master believer, he doesn't waste anything and he leaves no stone unturned or unfinished. That's why we read in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 21 to 22. In him the whole structure is joined together and grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also built together spiritually into a dwelling place for God. The temple Solomon completed points forward to Jesus Christ, who is still building his church into God's eternal dwelling place. Okay, how do we apply this chapter in our everyday lives? We need to offer our work to the Lord. That's what I think we need to do. There are going to be ordinary tasks in our week. Of course there are. Studying, working, cleaning, serving. We need to intentionally do it with excellence as an act of worship to Christ. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, how do you use your gifts faithfully, right? There are abilities that God has given you, and you need to ask yourself, how can I use this gift this week to serve someone else and glorify God? The gifts that you have been endowed upon you by your Creator so that you can reflect Him, you can magnify Him, you can show His love to all people. And that's what we should be aiming for. Alright, so we saw in this episode that God is honored both in worship and in ordinary work, that every gift and skill can become an act of worship, that excellence reflects the worthiness of God, that faithfulness means finishing the work God gives us to do, and that Solomon's temple points forward to Jesus Christ, who is building His living church. Next time we're going to see one of the greatest moments in Israel's history in 1 Kings chapter 8, as the Ark of the Covenant is going to be brought into the completed temple, and the glory of the Lord is going to fill the house. And we're going to explore God's presence, Solomon's prayer of dedication, and how this breathtaking moment fills and finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ. You don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.